It's known as the Age of Revolution, a period of less than 100 years when the old world made way for the new. In this video, we will take a look at how the 7 Years' War put Great Britain on a collision course with the 13 colonies, how colonists made decisions about which side to support in the American Revolution, and how pre-existing regional conflicts would ultimately set the nation on a path to civil war. The 7 Years' War is arguably the spark that lit the fuse of the Age of Revolution. Motivated by ambitions to expand empires, it was the first truly global conflict. Largely taking place in Europe, Africa, and Asia, it was in the battlefields of the Americas that the 7 Years' War proved critical. Here, it was a battle for rich resources, vast lands, and the future of the continent. But the people who lived here were merely pawns in the geopolitical fight for power and wealth. After 7 years, with the financial strain of a war on too many fronts, and having suffered significant defeats, the French finally surrendered and signed the Treaty of Paris in 1763. Although they had won the war, the victory had cost the British a fortune, nearly doubling their national debt, and they looked to the colonists to pay for it through taxes. With new tax laws imposed on them from a faraway king in Parliament, the colonists became more and more frustrated, and the rumblings of revolution grew louder. Allegiances between the colonists became divided between the Patriots and the Loyalists. The Patriots, such as Alexander Hamilton and Samuel Adams, wanted the colonies to govern themselves, while the Loyalists, such as Thomas Hutchinson and William Franklin, were committed to the monarchy and preserving trade links to Britain. But the largest group of colonists was undecided. Many were torn between their desire to stay part of the empire and their discontent with British rule. Others believed that activists like Thomas Paine were deliberately inciting violence between colonists, and some were fearful of the threat of impending war. The Patriots campaigned hard to win the undecided colonists over, publishing gazettes and organizing protests. Gaining their support would be critical. But it is important to remember that the inhabitants of the colonies were not just one homogeneous group. Each one had different sets of interests. Let's take a closer look at how these different groups of people made their choice. Many indigenous peoples believed the British would honor the treaties that they had signed to preserve their ancestral lands, and so they sided with the Loyalists. But other indigenous peoples had stronger relationships with the colonists, so they sided with the Patriots. Fear of further European settlement into their lands also influenced their decision. For free and enslaved Black people, choosing a side was also complex. To boost their numbers of soldiers, both the British and the Patriots insinuated the promise of freedom for all Black men who joined the fight. But these promises were ambiguous, and although thousands of Black men fought on both sides, there was no real plan to formally abolish slavery after the war. For both the indigenous peoples and Black colonists, free or enslaved, the choices were often down to personal circumstances. Geography would also play a critical role in decision-making for all colonists. Physical geography, natural resources, population, climate, and even religion all influenced which side to support. Most colonists identified with the town or colony in which they resided, and the culture and religion of their families. While the North and South were economically very different, the regions were united in their opposition to further taxation and the tightening of British control. The Sons of Liberty called for a boycott of British goods across all the colonies to address escalating issues of government. Delegates from each colony, except Georgia, attended the Continental Congress, bringing them together for the first time in 1774. And with the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776 and the end of the Revolutionary War in 1783, the fledgling nation began to shape a new government. But despite this apparent unity, each state retained its individual interests, something that was to plague the burgeoning nation. The question now was, how would these disparate states function as a single entity? In its first attempt to offer a solution, Congress wrote the Articles of Confederation, but the underlying issues of regionalism and a fear of recreating a replica of British rule left the document riddled with compromises. Under the Articles, the government lacked the power to tax, raise an army, regulate international trade, or establish an executive or judicial branch. Each state retained the ability to create its own currency and trade regulations, creating economic chaos. Southern slave states favored this autonomy and deregulation, but sought greater representation in Congress, while northern states wanted a more unified economic system and proportional representation. It took Shays' Rebellion to effect the much-needed reform. Responding to fears of further unrest, a campaign for a stronger federal government began. The result was the writing of the Constitution. However, not all of the weaknesses created by regionalism were addressed in the Constitution, notably the issue of slavery. Despite Benjamin Franklin's petition to bring it to an end, reform was not formally considered until 1808. And by then, the population of enslaved people had almost tripled, and the stakes were even higher. Ultimately, the fundamental regional differences between the states and unresolved questions about slavery would lead to the outbreak of the Civil War.